We want Classical Next to be seen as a community, what is not only coming once a year together, but being in touch all over the world. We have more than 50 countries participating, from Australia to Cuba, from South America to whatever. South Korea is also here, I think. So it is worldwide, I think, the biggest network in classical music, and we want you all to be in touch all over the year as you want. So we are happy to open this conference, and we have a very special speaker here because he will have an important role in Berlin in the future. And we don't know so much what he's thinking, what he's doing here, so we thought it's a good occasion to invite him here, but I think Aljena will introduce him. So thanks for coming, thanks for your interest and your energy, and we see each other the next 3 days very often, I think. And also please come to me, to Fabienne, to the board members, if there's any idea what we can do better. We are totally open for everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. Yes, you can see there is one chair still empty here on stage, and it's time that that gets filled. We are very excited to welcome our guest speaker this morning, or this afternoon, actually. He is currently the General Director of the Grand Théâtre de Genève, and starting in August 2026, he will be the director of the Deutsche Oper in Berlin. And we are very, very excited to welcome him to the stage. Please give a warm welcome to Aviel Cahn.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you?
Fine. This weather in Berlin, unexpectedly nice. So thank you for inviting me. I think I'm a bit of a paradise bird here in this Classical Next, because I think opera is not really the topic of Classical Next. Opera houses the kind of institutions that are not really represented in here. So I wondered at the first time when you invited me, is it of any interest here in this round, what I have to say? And on the other hand, I also was thinking, in this crowd, what I have to say is maybe actually in evidence. But in my crowd, I think, the opera crowd, it's not. So maybe you won't hear anything new to your ears, but it might confirm some of the thoughts you already had. Or anyway, I'm talking as an opera general director, so that's my word to address to you. I think if we look at opera around the world, we can, in general, we have to look at our societies, and I think societies at this moment are undergoing maybe the most dramatic changes in many, many, many years. Post-COVID, all the social online media world, what it brought to human kind, the migrations we lived through in Europe, but also in the States, I guess, the wars that are giving us concerns, that driving our societies in a certain directions, and sometimes a very dangerous one. In this context, I could paint a very dark picture of the situation of opera in today's world, saying that maybe it is in a terrible crisis. Why? Our formats are not out of our time. The stories are mostly old, very old. The length of our performances do totally not correspond to the span of attention or willingness for people to dedicate. Our audiences are tendenciously too old. We have a hard time to motivate younger generations to come to opera, or at least to become regular customers. We have alarming situation looking into finance, subsidy cuts, recently, for instance, in France, terrible problems for the opera houses there. The art form is too expensive. The salaries, we have lots of people in fixed employment. The salaries do not follow the indexations. Politicians are really not so interested in these old-fashioned institutions. And private donors of the younger generation are getting less and less numerous. Take as an example the Metropolitan Opera in New York. It's a million people cities. It has one opera house. Berlin still has 3++. If you look at Moscow, it has still 5 or 6 opera houses. The city as New York has one, and if you hear what their general director is saying, it has a hard time to finance, to survive, to find people wanting to see their shows. So we could maybe say opera is in crisis in the Western world. I'll come back to that. Another topic which I find also interesting is that sometimes the younger generation's audience are more conservative than maybe the more older audience, that they want the cliché of what they think opera is and was as a kind of museum of the past, rather that than to be challenged by a controversial approach. On the other hand, does anybody still have a feeling for quality? Sometimes I'm sitting in opera performances which I find really terribly bad or average or shaky, and you see the audiences applauding to any kind of mittelmäßig rehearsed performance, and you say, maybe quality is not needed anymore. The art form deteriorates in some kind of easy, cheap entertainment. Or you have repertory houses like the Deutsche Oper Berlin is one, that create opera from the Fließband, so to say, mass productions, the importance is to produce and not the quality or what you produce. And then there is the fear of a big audience of all that is new, meaning Carmen is sold out and contemporary creations have a hard time to find their audiences. On the other hand, and I'm coming back of the crisis in the Western world, we could also say that opera today has more audiences worldwide seen than ever before. We have opera in South America everywhere. We have opera in China, in Thailand, in India, in Africa. I recently was invited to the first opera production of Saudi Arabia. They created a contemporary new opera. We have opera in Iceland, Australia, New Zealand. So we could say that actually today opera is an art form that is much more widely spread than in the times of Verdi, Wagner, which we would say the golden age of opera in Europe. So there are maybe different ways of looking at the whole kind of field, not so much centered from we are here, but what is happening on the planet. So how to face these problems in Europe for an opera house today? I think we have two problems we have to look at. One is the cultural crisis in our society on one hand, and the other one is the structural problems we have concerning those too heavy, very expensive and inflexible institutions that we have. I start with the cultural crisis. I mentioned the Metropolitan Opera. So they're giving answers now, new pieces, people that concern the society, creating the new American operas for today's world, but maybe they're a bit late to start with. In any case, the statement that we cannot survive with playing for 90% of our repertoire, just old to very old works, is a very important statement. And we have to believe that we have to attract new audiences and we have to react early with new operas, new formats, challenging the art form, and should not be afraid to challenge the stories that we are telling, because again, the way they come over is sometimes very outdated and mainly perceived for a white conservative audience, perceived as a colonial art form, if we think of values in today's world. So we have to work against this. And I think new works indeed are the best way to fight it, to show that we can do pieces that are relevant as opera to our society. We should stop thinking as managers only of the old given audience that wants to see always the same over and over again. It's easy to fall into this pressure, but that audience might not fill your hall tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So you should stop thinking only for these people, and rather convince these people to be open to new ideas. And new ideas for opera could come also from outside the opera world and the classic world. I think it's exciting to work with artists who come from different disciplines, bring them into opera, contemporary art, dance, ballet, cinema, video, gaming, fashion, other musical forms, using even the social media in the way the art is made. And these elements could also attract new donors, because the old way of doning might not work anymore or might not be attractive anymore to the new generation. We should use these kind of artists also for the communication outside the given circles of opera lovers, creating bridges to these kind of artists, and open the circles, and change the way how we present an opera houses to the society. We should dare to challenge the old works, as I just said, not putting them on a socle and admiring them as a Roman statue, because theater is not the place for philological exercises. It should be a living creative art form. And we should include modern technologies. This is very hard because our opera houses and institutions are very often badly equipped, very old-fashionedly equipped, and we should work very hard to get, not only renovate the beautiful historic foyers, but get new technology in our houses to be able to afford to work and play with them. And we should open our houses widely for associative activities. Opera houses are ideally a destination and not just a place to come for the show. We should dynamize our houses through collaboration, through new formats. And there I'm talking also about pedagogical activities, education, cultural education on a large scale. It's fundamental, it's happening of course, but I guess it should happen much more than what it actually does. These are ongoing challenges. I try to tackle them, but I could also say I'm not always the best pupil, but I think we all have to work very hard on getting there. And working more in that direction. A short work, and then I'm closing. Structural challenges. How do we face this as we are heavy, large, unflexible? One of the problems are the union, the partners, the social partners. They may protect labor, but they make change almost impossible. The rigidity of the great groups, they make it difficult to develop free formats, to motivate to work with other artists who challenge the way the art form has been working, because it will take the employees that work in a kind of routine out of their comfort zone. People don't like this necessarily. We have to make more effort in that. Another problem is that the houses are not flexible to face new jobs that are needed. So for instance, many opera houses have still huge employees at the box office where everything works online, but you can't fire or change this kind of system in order to maybe create new jobs, for instance, on education, on communication, on social media, on new programming that you should develop. There is not enough money for investment. The houses are technically outdated. And it's very hard to find new employees. People, the younger generation, Z, etc., they don't want to work 100% or 150% in institutions where they may be badly paid and have to work much more and totally not in a free system for an old-fashioned institution. It's very hard for opera houses to recruit these days. And also, opera houses are very often very hierarchical structures, and younger generations don't like necessarily to work in hierarchical structures. So it's become hard to find new people for opera houses. And also analyses show that people who maybe 20 years ago would choose to go in an opera house because of the renommée of the institution. Oh, I work for La Scala. Oh, I work for the Deutsche Oper Berlin. This doesn't matter anymore. It's the least important argument to go and work for an institution. The most important is your flexibility in your working time, your influence as an employee that you can have on the big decisions in the company. So, conclusions. Opera will be more and more an endangered species if it stays a dusty art form from another time, if it's incapable to react to the challenges of our time, if it loses touch with a quickly evolving society, and hence, if it loses financial support because politicians or new generations of donors are not interested in it. Meaning, eventually, we need to challenge our structures, our repertoire, as well as our role and position in society. Thank you.